We're interrupting normal programming to bring you this breaking news. Democrat candidate Joe Biden has dropped out of the presidential race. He put out a statement just a short while ago, and in that statement, he talks about the progress the country's made over the last 3 years while he has been president, and saying that pointing out rather some of the gains the country has made, but saying that he will be stepping down as the nominee for the Democratic Party, and he will be addressing the nation later in the week to give more details about his decision. We know that Joe Biden has been isolating at his home in Delaware because he has tested positive for COVID-19. Him dropping out of this race was something that many people were speculating about, possibly expecting, especially as we saw more senior Democrats come out, call on him to step down as the candidate. Of course, he has not yet named or even backed who his replacement will be, and there are many people who are speculating about who the nominee could be. However, it does really put the Democratic Party on the back foot here. They are up against, of course, an incredibly strong Donald Trump and the Republican Party. He has had quite a week. It was just last weekend that Donald Trump survived an assassination attempt. Many of the analysts that we have spoken to on this channel say that he is most likely the candidate that is going to win this election in early November. But for now, the breaking news coming to you out of the United States: Joe Biden has dropped out of that U.S. presidential race. And of course, this comes after several things have happened over the last few weeks with regards to Biden, his health, and many speculating about whether or not he is able to continue not just as president, but as the nominee, putting into question his health. And that really came into focus during the debate between him and Donald Trump just a few weeks ago. Many people lambasting Biden for being unclear, for making mistakes during that. And the call started then for him to step down, to allow somebody else to step up as the nominee. One of those potential candidates could be Vice President Kamala Harris. She is had been supporting Biden, saying that he would stay in the race. One of the other names that people have been speaking about and bringing up is Michelle Obama, not just the wife of the former U.S. President Barack Obama, a very accomplished woman in her own right, and she could also possibly be the nominee. But at this point, there is uncertainty about who will fill the shoes of Joe Biden. And the Democratic Convention coming up in the autumn months in the United States. That, of course, following what we've just seen with the Republican National Convention that has taken place earlier in the week. And I'm going to get some reaction and analysis to all of this now with David DeRoche in Bethesda in Maryland. He's a professor at the National Defense University. And David, oh wow, what a night. What a Sunday night. Your reaction, firstly, to this news from Joe Biden.
Well, I think it was expected. The only question was how long it would take. And obviously, the longer he held on, the more difficult it would be for his party. So the question now is who's going to replace him. And he solves one problem, but he raises another one. So the obvious replacement is Kamala Harris, the vice president. But she is one of the few political figures who has lower polling numbers than Joe Biden and has no real base of support aside from ethnic affinity votes. On the other hand, if they go to an open convention and select, a politician with higher numbers, like, say, the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, or the governor of Pennsylvania, Governor Shapiro, then the problem is the base of the Democratic Party, which is very reliant upon ethnic minorities, particularly Black Americans and women, might be alienated. So they've solved one problem, they're moving to another one.
They certainly are, indeed. And, many were saying, and we saw this from Biden himself over the last week, he seemed to remain defiant, saying he will continue to stay in this race no matter what, even though early in the week he had given this media interview saying that one of the factors that may lead him to dropping out of the race is illness and advice from his doctors. Now with this COVID-19 diagnosis, and not the first time that he's had COVID, could this have played into his decision to step aside?
I don't think so. I think that's a pretext. The deterioration of him was noticeable, and I think that the Democratic Party, the leaders of the party, probably had a frank discussion with the people around Biden, who said, "Look, you've kept him from the public, we've shielded him from the normal stuff, and if you want to have a future in this party, you need to get him to do what's good for the party." And I think that eventually the people around Biden are the people who, who are more Biden than Democrats even, are the people who convinced him that it was time to go. I think COVID it may form an excuse, but I don't think that's convincing anybody. Right now, COVID is not looked at as a life-threatening disease. It's looked at as, a bad cold that lasts for a few days.
David, has this happened before in U.S. politics, where we've been this close to such a pivotal election and one of the nominees has decided to step aside for whatever reason?
I don't think it's happened this close to a convention in the modern era. In the old days, like we're talking about, the 2 centuries ago, conventions were typically, people would get together in a hotel and smoke cigars, and delegates would hash out who they were going to vote for. But the last time we saw an open convention in the Democratic Party was in 1968, also in Chicago, where the Democratic convention will be. A couple of unusual things happened. The incumbent president, Lyndon Johnson, took himself out of the race relatively early after losing the New Hampshire primary. The presumed heir apparent, Robert Kennedy, was assassinated in Los Angeles in the Ambassador Hotel. And so you had no clear front runner. You had an open convention, and you also had riots outside of the convention. Famously, of course, that led to the election of Richard Nixon as president of the United States. So I think the party is going to have to hustle very quickly to find a candidate that they can coalesce around and try to have an honorable, ordinary, orderly convention that will anoint whomever they decide on, and then try to take the battle to Donald Trump.
There is nothing ordinary, it seems, about these elections or what's happening right now in U.S. politics in the modern era, as you say. And I want to go back to those candidates, because this is something that's been spoken about a lot over the last few days. Who, of course, replaces him? You mentioned Kamala Harris there, but she's not polling very well. Gavin Newsom. There were also reports of Michelle Obama possibly being a candidate. Do you think that's something that could happen?
Well, people who know her well, and I don't know her except I know her the same way that anybody else in the world knows her, have said that she's emphatic in saying that she will not run. I think that part of her appeal is the fact that she does not have a political record. And so once, you become a candidate, then your whole life is looked at. And I think that would not be a good situation for her. So she's ruled herself out. Gavin Newsom appears to have his eye on 2028 and does not want to alienate the black and the women base of the Democratic Party. So far, he has been emphatic, saying that he will support President Biden and then Kamala Harris. I think he may have made a calculation that this race is lost anyhow, and he wants to preserve his viability. The other candidates, have their own reasons. We'll see what happens.
Okay, David, for now, I'm going to ask you to stay with us, but I want to go to Washington, D.C. and bring in our Andy Rosegen. Andy, this was something, as David was also saying, something that we expected to hear possibly this weekend, and now this statement issued from President Biden. Take us through what he had to say.
Right. In some ways, actually stunning. In other ways, maybe not surprising. But he really touted right off the beginning of that message on social media. He talked about his accomplishments, what they were able to do, able to come back from the COVID crisis and dig their way out of a recession. He talked up jobs created, things like that. And he got into this part where he was saying basically that it was time for the good of the party to step aside. He didn't talk anything specifically about why, just that it was for the good of the party. It was back when he was elected in 2020. He talked about being a transitional president, stepping aside for a younger generation after his first term in office. And that did not happen. He said he changed because he said the stakes became too high. And then he began to realize that Donald Trump would be his opponent again and felt the need to stay in. So this, like I said, shocking, but not entirely surprising. It seems to come out of the blue, but it was just yesterday, Yashni, that a number of folks had a rally outside the White House called the Pass the Torch rally, chanting, "Hey, hey, Joe, thank you, but it's time to go." And you had so many Democrats now, really, the dam had broken over the last 48 hours or so. And so it became inevitable. And if Joe Biden had stayed in, of course, that would have been just a train wreck for the Democrats. As far as the Republicans, former President Donald Trump was at a rally yesterday where he made fun of this entire situation. He made fun of Joe Biden. He made fun of Kamala Harris. And what's so interesting here is that the Republicans in general have been really targeting Kamala Harris ever since that disastrous debate performance by Joe Biden over 3 weeks ago now that led to this cascade of calls for him to step aside, because they knew that Kamala Harris most likely would be the next one to step in his shoes. However, we simply don't know. As our last guest so eloquently put it, there are so many other candidates who might step in if there is an open floor fight at the convention. And a few other names that have been tossed around: the governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear, the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. These are Democrats with big standings in their states. And then, of course, the other question is who becomes the vice presidential candidate. One of those men could step in, or we'll just have to see. But this is so fascinating, and it takes you back to these 1968 comparisons when LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, announced that he was stepping aside as his party nominee. Of course, that came in March of that year, give the Democrats a lot of time to sort of regroup. It will be fascinating to see what happens at this August convention in Chicago.
It certainly will be, and August not that far away indeed. But Andy, just remind us, there were several senior Democrats who came out in the last few days saying that it was in the best interests of the party and of the country for President Biden to step aside as the nominee. Just take us through who some of those Democrats were and why they're so important at a senior level in the party.
Right. It was right after that debate, a little over 3 weeks ago, that you had some sort of backbenchers, as they're called, just voices in the Democratic Congress who are not that quite influential, who came out and kind of timidly said, maybe he should step aside. We're calling on him to step aside. That number, by Wednesday night, when Joe Biden went into COVID isolation back to his home in Delaware, that number exploded from 20 to over 30. And then along with U.S. senators, of course, who carry more weight as well. And then these reports that came out that the heavyweights of the party, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, former House Speaker and still a current member of Congress, Nancy Pelosi, had reportedly been telling Joe Biden behind the scenes essentially the same message, which is, look, you cannot win. And just as importantly, you are going to drag down other Democratic races, which would put the House and the Senate in jeopardy of going to the Republicans. And a lot of people felt like, look, if Donald Trump wins, at least the Democrats will hold on to the House and Senate to offer some sort of checks and balances to his presidency. But Democrats were strongly fearing that that could fall as well. So that was the message that President Biden was hearing. There had been reports that former President Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton were kind of supporting him, but then came as well in the last 48 hours or so these very credible reports that former President Barack Obama, a huge heavyweight in the Democratic Party, of course, Joe Biden was his vice president, that he was even saying, it's time for Joe to reconsider. So all this was going behind the scenes. We heard reports that Joe Biden was angry, reportedly seething about what he kind of considered a betrayal here by his own Democrats. But Democrats really went out of their way to say, look, this is not us telling you that we are mad at you or that we don't think you've done a great job. It's us telling you that we think you need to step aside because the signs are there. It is not looking good, not only in the polling, but in your public performances. He's done nothing since that disastrous debate performance to kind of right the ship, and his performances seeming haltingly speaking, and his gait very slowly walking down those steps was the last video that we saw of him. And that was really enough, I think, to push things over the edge here. So obviously he got the message. There were a lot of rumors that it would happen today. It did. So now another big question here, Yashini, is how does Joe Biden approach this at the convention? Does he get out there and give his full-throated endorsement to the next in line, and it might be Kamala Harris, or does he sort of stay on the sidelines? Hard to say, but the Republicans and Donald Trump simply, publicly anyway, they say they don't care. They're going to attack whoever is out there, but I have no doubt that the Republicans are a little nervous right now, to say the least, because Joe Biden was a drag on the Democrats, and whoever will come in, and the Democratic strategist talked about this the other day, that Democrats have been in such a deep, dark hole lately. He said that with a new nominee, they will fly. Their wings will be out there, and they'll have reason now to just celebrate and to move forward with the next candidate.
Yeah, this is going to be incredibly pivotal, who the next candidate will be, of course,
Yes.
Andy. And you mentioned there this disastrous debate, and I think that's really one of the words that was used so much after that debate. And could that be seen as somewhat of a turning point in this presidential race? Because regardless of what was said during that debate, it was Joe Biden's response and demeanor that really got most people talking and put into question his abilities, especially as someone who is 81 years old.
Right. And the Democrats, if they win this election in November, they will look back and say, you know what? That debate was the best thing that could have happened to us. Already, they're saying this probably was a good thing because they were seeing the signs for months. They were seeing Joe Biden struggling in his speeches, oftentimes forgetting names, forgetting places. I remember seeing him at the White House in March, meeting with the Irish Prime Minister, I believe, and he was talking very solemnly about the situation in Gaza and Israel. And he referred to that situation twice as Ukraine, and he didn't catch himself. And Democrats were seeing this. They were wincing, and they got tired of wincing, Yashini. They just thought that this debate performance was so bad that that was enough to try to push him aside, to say, thank you, Mr. President, you've accomplished a lot. And really, by any metric, he has accomplished a lot. Whether or not you agree with him on the issues, his administration has accomplished quite a bit. The question, and your last guest talked a bit about this, who best jumps into this spot? Kamala Harris, the vice president, is the obvious choice. In polling, they have found that she does slightly better than Joe Biden would against Donald Trump in a hypothetical matchup. Of course, that's just hypothetical, and is slightly better enough to actually put the Democrats over the top and win. Hard to say, but that's the real danger for Democrats here. Everyone's going to be reading the tea leaves, reading the polling. Who is the best person to put us out front? And the tough thing for the Democrats is there's nobody really super obviously right now. And your last guest talked about this, that stands out as someone who could just take the torch and really inspire people. But I think Democrats, regardless, are going to breathe a big sigh of relief. We've been talking to voters, and voters across the country have been interviewed about this question. And so many of them were disgusted by the two choices they had here and really depressed that Joe Biden was the best the Democrats could do. And not exactly thrilled by anybody else. But as I said earlier, I think they're going to be thrilled by the fact that at least he stepped aside. This drama, which has completely overshadowed the debate itself 3 weeks ago, is over, and now they can proceed forward.
Okay, Andy, I just want to bring our viewers who have just tuned in up to speed with our breaking news at this time. U.S. President Joe Biden has said he will step aside as the Democratic Party nominee for the next presidential election in November. He issued a statement, and part of that statement, he said, and I'm quoting, "I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term." That term, of course, ending on the 20th of January next year. Now, he has continued to post on the social media platform X, where he has said that he now endorses Vice President Kamala Harris as the nominee. And that's something he's just put out very recently, saying, I want to offer my full support and endorsement for Kamala to be the nominee of our party this year. So, Andy, there we have it from Joe Biden himself endorsing Harris.
And not just his endorsement, Yashni, that would include his campaign money. It is in his decision here how to direct his campaign money. And if this endorsement holds, he would direct that campaign money to Kamala Harris. And that's a sizable war chest of money. Joe Biden started out this campaign with a pretty sizable war chest of campaign cash, far above Donald Trump. Trump has since closed the gap. But that would go to Kamala Harris. But again, these are unanswered questions. You know, it's a Sunday, so I don't think anyone's going to come up with any answers in the next 24 hours. But the Democrats have to then decide, okay, if Kamala Harris is our nominee, and there will not be a floor fight, as they say at the convention, of multiple nominees throwing their hat in the ring, that means that she will get that campaign cash and she will blast ahead forward with it. You know, she has been trying to be, you know, as best she can, kind of toe the line the last few weeks, sounding very supportive of the president and the Biden-Harris ticket, without kind of sounding like she's waiting in the wings for something. She's been absolutely resolute in talking about how Joe Biden and her are moving ahead and with every intention of winning this election. So she's played it just right, the way she's supposed to be. But now she will be unfettered. She'll be unchained from this debacle for the Democrats and be able to get out there full-throated and prosecute her case. She is a former prosecutor, and she likes to talk about that. And, you know, the Democrats will certainly be happy that she will be able to more fully attack Donald Trump, but also, much better than Joe Biden, be able to knock down various falsehoods that he tells. He has a history of telling falsehoods. And at the debate, you know, Joe Biden was criticized because he wasn't able to really knock down to attack those falsehoods on a regular basis. She will be better. Again, she's a former prosecutor in California, a former senator from California. She did run for president once before in the primaries in 2020. She lost out to Joe Biden. Then he picked her as his running mate. And she is technically, she has Indian roots and African American roots, and that is going to be a talking point for her as well. So we'll see. On the campaign trail, I'm sorry, in her role as vice president, she started out kind of rough. She was sort of mocked. She didn't quite get a message out there quite well. She has kind of grown into the job. And I will say, when the U.S. Supreme Court dumped the Roe versus Wade federal protections for abortion in the summer of 2022, that created an earthquake among a lot of women. And she became the voice for those women out there on the campaign trail, just criticizing heavily that decision. That decision to end Roe versus Wade abortion protections in America is what helped the Democrats really in the November 2022 midterm elections. And Kamala Harris was a big part of that. So she has found her voice. Will it continue? Will she be able to take on Trump? We'll see.
We will see indeed. And Biden continuing to post on X, telling supporters to donate to Kamala Harris's campaign. We've also had some reaction from the Democratic Senate leader, Chuck Schumer, saying that Biden has once again put his country, his party, and our future first. That's a direct quote from Schumer. And Andy, very tellingly, of course, Donald Trump has also responded to this, and he has spoken to CNN. He thinks Vice President Harris will be easier to beat than Biden after Biden now stepped aside as a candidate. And Kamala Harris was someone that he referred to yesterday evening when he addressed his first campaign rally after, of course, last week's assassination attempt. But in it, he took the opportunity to mock her, not talk about anything that she has accomplished.
Right. And, you know, Trump really risks going too far here. You know, he has nicknames, bad nicknames for everybody, whether they be Republican or Democrat, anybody who opposes him. And he's made no secret of that. And as I listen to this siren go past, hopefully you can still hear me. What the risk he runs here is sounding sexist. And that has turned off a lot of independent women voters And those independent women voters are what either candidate need to win here to win the election. Trump's poll numbers are, his favorability has gone up a little bit in the last week or so, but he's still struggling with independent suburban women, suburban mothers. And if he takes it too far, if he criticizes Kamala Harris in a way that sounds sexist or looksist, he's a very big person on looks. He referred to Nikki Haley, his competition in the Republican primary, as bird brain. That did not sit well with a lot of women. He's got to be careful to not turn this into probably a sexist kind of attack on Kamala Harris.
Okay, Andy, for now, we'll leave it there. But I know you're going to stay with us as we go back to David DeRoche, who has been listening to all of this. And Prof, it's been an incredible last 30 minutes or so, getting this announcement first from Biden and now him saying that he endorses Kamala Harris. How much weight will that endorsement have at the Democratic National Convention expected to be held next month?
Well, theoretically, every delegate is free to vote for whomever they want to vote for. So they were pledged to the Biden ticket. Harris is part of that. But I think that, it's one thing to say, well, this person is ready to be vice president. They don't automatically transfer. So it's up to the individual delegates. But I think the bigger issue is in campaign financing. So the Biden-Harris campaign raised about $230 million. And that money can only seamlessly slide to Kamala Harris if Biden moves. If there was neither Biden nor Harris, then that money would have to either be refunded to donors or they would have to incorporate as a political action committee that is prohibited from contributing or coordinating directly to the campaign. It can only give about $5,000 out of $230 million. All the TV ads that they bought would have to be canceled and rebooked at a higher rate. So just the mechanics of it, as well as the points that Robert made earlier, and the demographic box that Harris checks, kind of makes her the inevitable candidate. And I think that when you look at how the Democratic Party works, the importance of the African-American base, I think that passing over Harris would be viewed as alienating a key constituency that they need in November. So it's kind of the inevitable choice.
Do you think that she appeals to the many undecided voters in the United States who right now would have seen what's happened over the last week, would have watched Donald Trump at the Republican National Convention, now seen Biden drop out and endorse Kamala Harris? And at this point, there are many people wondering what to do come November, who to vote for on several issues. And as you say, she does tick many boxes, if we can put it in that way. Do you think she has enough to appeal to those Americans who are yet to decide on who to vote for?
I don't think she does, honestly. I mean, she has been underwhelming as a vice president, which is traditionally an underwhelming position. Honestly, she's never really run a competitive race. So she's been a beneficiary of one of the last great political machines, appointed as a young civil servant by Willie Brown, who was sort of the kingmaker of California politics, to jobs that paid six figures for minimal work. Then she was anointed by Willie Brown again, who was the mayor of San Francisco, to her positions in San Francisco city government, and then appointed as a replacement senator, and again, the beneficiary of machines. So it's difficult. There's a lot of tape of her speaking, and when she speaks, it's not as convincing as one would hope for in a presidential candidate. And then finally, the things that she's been in charge of haven't gone well, most notably the southwest border, which is increasingly becoming an issue resident on the national front. So I think there's a lot to run against her with, and I think that people have kind of made up their mind on her. She doesn't have the clear track record of somebody, say Michelle Obama, where there's not things that, can be tagged to her. So I think it'll be interesting to see what's happening. I think where she does bring value is in mobilizing the Democratic base. One of the things that the 2016 postmortem the failure of the Hillary Clinton campaign was that African Americans kind of sat out the race. They didn't have the same level of enthusiasm they did in Barack Obama's 2 races, and they know that they need to have a very overwhelming African American turnout to win. So she could conceivably be an assist in that, if not a determining factor.
Who do you think would then be a better candidate? You mentioned Michelle Obama there, but when I asked our correspondent Andy Rosen about that, he said Michelle Obama in the past has said she will vehemently not stand as nominee, and particularly because she doesn't have a track record in politics. However, of course, she would have the former president, Barack Obama, as an advisor behind her. Who else do you think would be better suited here than Kamala Harris?
Well, I mean, we can take Michelle Obama off the table. She's been emphatic about that, and there's agreement on that. So when you look at people who are ready to run, that are in the game, I think that you're looking at primarily governors. So there's people like the governor of Pennsylvania, Mr. Shapiro, the governor of Illinois, Mr. Pritzker. People talk about Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, but given that, he is, part of the machine that made her, I don't think that he will oppose her when this is her shot. I think he has an eye for the future, and he knows that if he wants to run in 2028, the way to do that is not by opposing an African-American woman from your own state. So I think that we're looking primarily at governors. There'll be the usual ambitious senators, but some of them have been strangely quiet. I'm thinking particularly of Cory Booker, who is in many ways sort of a male analog of Kamala Harris, although he is a far better speaker, but he's been strangely quiet. So I think we're looking at governors. Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan is another one who's often mentioned. The challenge with all of these is that when you're a governor running for office, everything that goes wrong in your state will be raised against you in a primary. And Illinois in particular is a state that is particularly troubled. Michigan has, horrendous job losses and population loss. And Pennsylvania has some problems, although it's primarily a state on the rebound. So I don't think there's an obvious person who can oppose her, particularly given the president's endorsement.
Okay, David DeRoche, always good to get your analysis. Thank you so much. And to our viewers who have just tuned in, our breaking news this Sunday is that U.S. President Joe Biden has dropped out of the presidential race. He is standing down as the candidate for the Democratic Party, and there's been plenty of reaction, including from Donald Trump himself. He has posted on his social media platform Truth, and this is what he has said. I'm reading verbatim here. Crooked Joe Biden was not fit to run for president and is certainly not fit to serve, and never was. He only attained the position of president by lies, fake news, and not leaving his basement. These are, of course, Donald Trump's words on the social media platform. And I want to get some context to all of this with our Andy Rosen, who's been following this in D.C. And Andy, when we look at such a statement from Trump and what he has told CNN, saying that if Kamala Harris does become the Democratic nominee, she will be easier to beat. Trump certainly seeming very confident now of a victory in November.
Certainly he does. But I think that statement is another bit of an exaggeration from Donald Trump. Of course, you have to sound confident, Yashni, when you realize you're facing off against a new opponent. But there is no doubt that Kamala Harris will at least energize the Democratic Party in a way that Joe Biden was not. So it certainly sounds confident. I would say a little bit overconfident from Donald Trump. He could certainly beat Kamala Harris, possibly any other Democrat. But there's no doubt the Republicans are not feeling so good about this right now. They were feeling much more confident as the polls were slipping for Joe Biden. But Kamala Harris is a bit untested. Of course, they will try to tie Kamala Harris, of course, to any criticisms they have of Joe Biden and his administration. Kamala Harris will be out there full-throated. David was talking about it a moment ago about, would there be anybody else feasibly other than Kamala Harris? The truth is, if you passed over Kamala Harris, you would really anger a lot of people. Passing over an African-American woman who is next in line to the presidency, that would be a huge step for the Democrats. What would any other candidate do better against Donald Trump? It's hard to say, but for both candidates, both candidacies, Yashni, the main goal up to this point has not so much been pulling voters from one side to the other. It's simply getting to their own people who might be vaguely supportive of Harris or Biden or vaguely supportive of Trump and convincing them to get off their couches, get out their door and go vote, because so many voters, about 25% of those asked, are what they call double haters, people who just didn't like either candidate and who would very likely sit out this election, say, I'm not even going to bother to go out and vote. But what the Democrats are hoping here is that now that Joe Biden is stepping aside, Kamala Harris will just get their Democratic supporters to get off the couch and go pull that lever for the Democrats. That's the goal here. You're really not going to pull anybody off from either side because of this decision. And that's what ordinary voters were saying out in the country, how depressed they were about this rematch from 2020, Biden versus Trump. Well, now the Biden part is gone. In comes a new candidate. Again, it would seem to be more likely to be Kamala Harris, but I think that statement from Donald Trump, although he has to sound confident, a bit overconfident there, the Republicans are scrambling now to see how can we attack Kamala Harris and tamp down the excitement that Democrats will certainly feel for this new person, whoever it is, and it might be Kamala Harris.
And it might be indeed, and Donald Trump even started with some of that heckling during his campaign rally on Saturday, Andy. And Andy, I know you're going to stay with us, but I'm going to bring in political advisor and commentator Rina Shah, who I know has certainly been following this breaking news this Sunday. And Rina, just give us your reaction to President Biden dropping out of this race.
Well, certainly this is a day I will remember for the rest of my life. This is a historic moment for the nation. I pray for my nation because the United States is a young country. We have a great deal of problems that we face today, but we don't know the road ahead right now. And because we just don't know this moment. We don't know a moment where a president has stepped aside while he's serving his term. And so it brings a great deal of uncertainty, anxiety, and if anything, but there is a moment for hope. So I am hopeful. But I do want to acknowledge, as somebody who crossed over as a lifelong Republican, I did cross over and vote for Joe Biden in 2020. And I want to acknowledge that I do pray for him. I think he has served our country honorably for the vast majority of his life in public service. He has had good intentions, I believe, and that's why I voted for him in 2020. He has courage, humility, and selflessness. And I think those are the characters of him as a leader. And they should be acknowledged and revered despite this moment, because those were the exact traits that led me to cross over and millions of other of my fellow Americans to vote for him in 2020. So though the road ahead is a bit uncertain, I do thank the President Biden for doing the right thing and stepping aside and also endorsing Kamala Harris as the next nominee in a tweet that followed up his letter.
Do you think that he's made the right endorsement here and that other Democrats will follow suit?
On a strategic level, he had to make this endorsement. If he had not, the infighting that many people have seen spill out of the Beltway would have continued, and it would have been a bad, dark look for Democrats. Because when you have the first Black woman as vice president, you don't just look like you're not paying any mind to her. And if I were advising President Biden, which I never have, and am not, I will say that, he should have maybe named her in that letter he put out instead of in a tweet. But he did do it. So it is important because now, despite what kind of convention the Democrats have decided they want to have, an open convention, I believe they need to have one of those if they want to be smart about the moment and make it look like Kamala Harris earned this nomination herself.
Okay, Rina, we'll be coming back to you soon, but we're going to go to Washington and speak to Benji Hayer. And Benji, this has been a last 40 minutes of plenty of reaction also coming into Joe Biden's announcement. What have some lawmakers been saying about his decision?
Well, let's start most recently with Senate's Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, one of those we've heard from reports over the past couple of days express privately to Joe Biden that he may not have a viable candidacy to win the presidency against Donald Trump. And it has so transpired that Joe Biden has eventually relented to those calls. Chuck Schumer, again on X, on Twitter, posting in past few minutes that Joe Biden is a true patriot and a true American, a great president, a great legislative leader. Remember all the different bills that have been passed in the past couple of years. And he calls him a, quote, truly amazing human being. His decision was not easy, says Senate's Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, but he once again put his country, his party, our country first. And I think that that ultimately is going to be the sentiment that we hear expressed across the Democratic Party caucus over the course of the coming hours. Gratitude for Joe Biden, not just in terms of his presidency, but his decades-long life of public service, one of the youngest senators ever to serve in the United States, going on, of course, to serve as vice president. And then, of course, his most recent 4 years in the Oval Office. And I think that we'll also see the Democratic Party coalescing at some point around a new candidate. But ultimately, it is not clear where we go from here. Joe Biden, of course, endorsing Kamala Harris, as we've heard from other contributors in the past half an hour or so. But ultimately, the process now opens up. Joe Biden's delegates who were going to vote for him off the back of the president winning his set of primaries are now effectively open to vote for other candidates, and the endorsement from Joe Biden will go a long way for Kamala Harris, but we don't much know about the process from there. So in terms of reaction, I think, as I say, there'll be a gratitude, especially from the Democrat Party side, for Joe Biden, his decision, perhaps some sadness, perhaps some chaos in the next few hours from this unprecedented situation that hasn't happened since Lyndon B. Johnson in 1968. And then it'll be interesting to see exactly what lawmakers are saying about where to go next. Not that they have an actual say over who the nominee can be. That is potentially up to the delegates. But their comments, especially from the higher-ups of the party, could sway exactly what happens next.
Yeah, exactly what happens next. This is the big question now, isn't it, Benji? I mean, you speak about the chaos, but many were expecting this announcement to be made and expecting it to be made this weekend, especially after some of what we've seen over the last few weeks following his disastrous performance during that presidential debate with Donald Trump. And what is expected to happen now at the Democratic Convention, which will be taking place next month? I mean, people who are members of this party certainly have some really big decisions to make.
Well, exactly so. Well, let's just break down exactly what the process is from here. Democrats have to choose a new nominee. That's the bottom line. It might be Kamala Harris. It might be other governors whose names have been floated in the past couple of days. We were expected to have a roll call vote, which would have essentially made Joe Biden the nominee before the convention took place. That was supposed to happen sometime after the 1st of August. That is likely to be cancelled. Then, from the 19th to the 22nd of August, we have the Democrat Party convention, where whoever the nominee is accepting of that position. Now, as I mentioned before, Joe Biden swept the primaries, so his delegates who would have voted for him are now open to vote for another candidate. It may be Kamala Harris, but ultimately they are released and have the constitutional ability to choose from whoever decides to put themselves forward. We don't know specifically how the delegates will vote, but of course Joe Biden's endorsement of Vice President Kamala Harris will go a very long way. We are expecting to, I presume, hear something from her directly, and I'm sure she has spoken, of course, to President Joe Biden before that endorsement was made public. But ultimately, we are in a near unprecedented situation here. The last time that a sitting president abandoned his re-election campaign was Lyndon B. Johnson in 1968. When he did that, a chaotic Democratic Party convention followed, marred with protests, and the Republicans swept to victory in that presidential election.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be a very interesting next few months in the lead up to that November election. Benji Haya in Washington, D.C. Thanks, Benji. Now, after Joe Biden's disastrous performance during the first presidential debate with Donald Trump back in June, growing numbers of Democrat politicians and supporters called on him to step aside as the party's nominee for this year's election. Dozens of Democrat members of Congress publicly called for Biden to withdraw from the race, including prominent California Representative Adam Schiff. Senate Democrat leader Chuck Schumer urged Biden to drop out, while House leader Nancy Pelosi told the president he cannot win the election. That was all reported. Now, film director Rob Reiner and author Stephen King were among the many celebrities who publicly called for Biden to pull out. Actor George Clooney wrote an op-ed in the New York Times in which he praised Biden but said the Democrats needed a new nominee. Clooney's close relationship with former President Barack Obama fueled speculation that Obama also believed Biden should not run. Former staff from the Obama administration, including David Axelrod, said on television Biden should step down. Obama himself reportedly told allies Biden's chances of winning were diminishing and he should not be the candidate. We're going to bring in Reena Shah again. She's a political advisor and commentator. And Reena, when we were speaking earlier, you said that you were someone who was a Republican and in 2020 you chose to vote for Joe Biden. And I'm sure there were many Americans who felt the same way that you did. What was it about that election in 2020 that made you decide that Joe Biden was the man that you wanted to lead your country?
When I saw the matchup between Donald Trump and Joe Biden first come to be in 2020, I knew right away I had to do the right thing and put country over party. In my mind, it was that race back then was about integrity and character. And Joe Biden has exhibited courage, humility, and selflessness in this moment by stepping aside and resigning. Look, we don't know the road ahead. It's marred with uncertainties, but I am incredibly hopeful for the country. I actually think this is an exciting time for the Democrats. At their convention next month in Chicago, they could show democracy in action. I have talked to some of our country's preeminent voting experts, and they share that sentiment with me that this does not have to be a chaotic process. It does not have to be a chaotic convention. Excuse me. There are processes and procedures in place to keep it from going off the rails. There are a couple options as to how it can work. Now, yes, Biden has endorsed Kamala Harris, but that doesn't automatically put her in the place of him. He won all these primaries. So if Democrats want to have a really open process where the American people feel read in, and people like me will take great interest, and I think it will also sort of promulgate this feeling across the electorate that this is fresh, this is a choice. And we've just for months been dealing with frustration and apathy. I think the moment can be exciting if we look at it, and the Democrats start to be very earnest about the process moving forward.
Now, how do you think Republicans are looking at what's happened this Sunday? Do you think they feel invigorated by this? Donald Trump, of course, as always, showing that he is very confident that he will now win that election in November.
Now, I just mentioned process a moment ago because it's going to be very important as to how Republicans are made to feel, particularly Trump supporting Republicans who want to see him back in the White House. The Democrats could have an open convention and a number of candidates could put themselves forth. We've already started to hear from people like West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin that he wants to see a ticket with Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear and Pennsylvania Governor Shapiro. I think in general, what we know right now is that there will be more calls like that, perhaps, or there could be unity. But an open convention definitely could scare Republicans. Right now, I think Republicans are a bit scared because Biden, they felt, was easier to beat. But they are scared that Kamala could turn out the vote for herself. However, if it becomes an open convention and we get a completely different ticket, I think Republicans will be even more scared.
And who could be on that ticket? If it's not Kamala Harris, people will also be wondering who the vice presidential nominee could be. We saw somewhat of a surprise for many that J.D. Vance was nominated with the Republicans. But now, as you say, for Democrats, this really is an open ticket. It's fair game.
Well, yes. So talking about the moment where there's no Harris on the ticket and it's a completely different ticket, that kind of ticket would probably be very encouraging to a lot of Democrats because it would be completely fresh faces. And with that, they would have a chance to bring new people under their banner, again, with unknowns. Because Kamala Harris did run in the Democratic primary for president, and Biden beat her. And I also want to remark just on fact, her campaign in that Democratic primary was very unsuccessful. It pretty much failed. But then Biden named her as his running mate. So if we see a completely different ticket, again, I think it could be encouraging to those Americans who are planning to stay home. 80 million Americans didn't show up to vote in 2020. We have no idea what those people are going to do. So an open convention process and or a completely different ticket definitely could advantage the Democrats.
It certainly could. Very exciting times for U.S. politics. A bit of chaos too, but it's certainly never a dull moment in Washington. Rena Shah there for us. I'm going to bring in now Nick Harper. He's in Delaware, where Joe Biden is recuperating from COVID-19. Nick joining us now. And Nick, it's just about an hour ago that Joe Biden put out the statement saying that he was stepping aside. Just remind us what he said in that statement and why he's choosing to do so at this time.
That's right. Let me just bring up this statement for you now, because those words really quite incredible. He started off by reminding the American people what he believes are his greatest accomplishments during his 3.5 years in office. He speaks about expanding affordable healthcare. He speaks about creating jobs. He speaks about helping millions of veterans. But he then goes on to say that it has been the greatest honor of my life to serve you as president. And while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term. So he will continue to be president through the November election until January the 20th, when his term ends. He will be focused, though, not on a re-election bid, but on those duties as a president. After he put out that statement, shortly after that, he went on to give his full endorsement to his Vice President, Kamala Harris, the second bombshell announcement out of here, Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, this afternoon. Because it wasn't clear if Joe Biden were to drop out at some point whether or not he would endorse a particular candidate. But here we have him saying that he throws his full support behind her, and therefore he's hoping that the American public, that the voters, that those Democratic Party people out there who've perhaps been looking at this chaos for the last 3.5 weeks and getting worried, they will also now throw their support behind Kamala Harris as well.
And Nick, have we had any reaction so far from senior politicians? I know that Chuck Schumer, the U.S. Senate Majority Leader, has put something out on X. What are we hearing from other U.S. lawmakers about this decision from Biden?
Well, we've heard from Donald Trump. He was quite quick in his response, putting it out on his social media platform, Truth Social. There was no moment really in which we saw him taking perhaps a chance to reflect on what Joe Biden has done in the last 3.5 years. This was Donald Trump in full attack mode. It begins like this: crooked Joe Biden was not fit to run for president and is certainly not fit to serve, and never was. He then went on to say that he was propped up by the fake news, that he didn't leave his basement, and he goes on to say that his presidency, which he hopes to take over from Joe Biden after November's election, will be even greater for America. No real moment of congratulating Joe Biden or endorsing his decision to step down. Instead, reminding Republican voters out there of the name that he uses for Joe Biden, crooked Joe Biden, that he put there in that statement.
Okay, Nick Harper in Delaware, where Joe Biden is recovering from COVID-19. Thanks so much, Nick. And I'm going to go back to David DeRoche now. And David, what do you think U.S. allies are considering and thinking about when they are watching these developments? Because, of course, this plays so much into U.S. foreign relations, a country that one of our guests said is still a young democracy, but an incredibly powerful and influential global player?
Yeah, it's kind of a glimpse into the sausage factory, isn't it? Well, I mean, what you're having here is a democratic process that's taking place in a period where one of the candidates has had to drop out very, very late in the race. So I think, people will look at this, and foreign policy is rarely a decisive issue in American elections, but one thing Americans like is they like to know that they're respected by their partners and by their potential adversaries. So the idea that Biden was incapable of effectively governing or speaking, arguably that's been taken off the table. Now you have, an open process to see who will go against Donald Trump. I think people kind of know what you're going to get with Donald Trump. The question is who's going to replace him. And Kamala Harris is, for most people, still a bit of an unknown. So she does have more of an international perspective than other Americans. She went to high school in Canada, which is not generally well known about her, but her formative years of adolescence were spent in Montreal. So there is a possibility of a greater internationalist perspective, and her parents were both immigrants, one from India, one from Jamaica. So she could conceivably bring a more internationalist perspective on American government if she is in fact the nominee. But right now, it's open. And I think that not just foreigners, but also Americans are about to get a lesson in civics and some of the lesser known aspects of how American political parties choose their nominees.
Yeah, and that process is going to be taking place between the 19th and the 22nd of August. That's about a month away in Chicago. And how's that process going to work? Because now, as you say, this is fair game. Kamala Harris has been endorsed by Joe Biden, but there are certainly plenty of other names that would want to be thrown into the hat to become the presidential nominee.
Yeah, that's a good question. And, Kamala Harris is not completely unknown to the Americans. And, I was just checking, her polling rate is about 11% underwater. So 11% more Americans have 39% of Americans have a favorable impression of her, and about 50% have an unfavorable impression of her. So, she is by no means assured of taking the nomination. The people who felt Joe Biden was incapable of defeating Donald Trump will probably feel the same thing about Kamala Harris. So what people will try to do is to solidify on a party nominee, and that could be Kamala Harris. She's the most likely candidate. And they want to have it done before the convention starts. The goal of the convention is to have like an orchestra performance. You don't want to see people tuning up and rehearsing. You want to have unity on display for the entire nation. So right now, I think Kamala Harris or anybody who wants to oppose her is busy calling delegates, these former Joe Biden delegates and these super delegates, sitting members of Congress, Democratic governors and the like, trying to convince them to get on their side before the convention occurs. If the candidate is not selected before the convention, then I think there's going to be real problems for the party. There's also a form versus substance thing. I think most people will want to have the form of an open convention where they can say, look, the delegates freely and democratically arrived upon this decision, but they don't want to take the chance of people, dissenting, going to 5 or 6 ballots to see who's going to be the nominee. So I think what you'll try to have is the substance of the candidate selection locked up within the next few weeks. And then you'll have the form of an open convention that will select that candidate who hopefully has been previously selected. Otherwise, the party looks weak and divided.
Yes, certainly going to be an interesting next few weeks ahead of that convention. David DeRoche, thank you so much. And if you've just tuned in, our breaking news this hour, Joe Biden pulling out of the U.S. presidential race. He will not be competing against Donald Trump in November's presidential election. Our Claire Harriott looks back, though, on his political career.
I am running, and we're going to win. I'm not going to change that.
But after sustained and widespread anxiety over his age-related impairment, change that he did. And US President Joe Biden has confirmed he'll be a one-term leader. Biden looked every one of his 81 years during the presidential debate against Donald Trump. It was a disastrous night for the Democrats. 90 minutes was all it took to all but end a political career spanning more than 50 years.
I expect these fellows are going to eventually judge me on my merit, not on my age. And
at the time of his election to the US Senate in 1972, Biden wasn't old enough to serve. He turned 30, the minimum age requirement, shortly before taking office.
We must take back the streets.
He was a senator for the next 36 years, building up foreign policy and national security experience with an ability to get things done on Capitol Hill. In 2008, Biden was named as then-Senator Barack Obama's running mate.
Yes, I accept your nomination to run and serve with Barack Obama.
Biden had tried to win the presidential nomination that year, as well as in 1998.
I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
He served 2 terms as vice president, with Obama as president. Obama was just one top-tier Democrat since the debate who'd urged Biden to reconsider his position, reportedly saying while Biden recovered from COVID-19 that the 46th president's path to victory had greatly diminished. The frustration amongst senior Democrats was that Biden and his inner circle wouldn't listen to their concerns. And commentators believe that's why the view of Obama and others that Biden needed to step aside was leaked to the press. Some analysts have said it's natural for a person of high accomplishment to fail to recognise when it's time to stand aside. But what's at stake is the US presidency, the most powerful office in the most powerful country on earth. And that's not all. Opinion polls suggested Biden could have lost the Senate and the House, meaning there'd be no checks and balances on a Trump administration. Biden held on for weeks after the debate, saying attempts to remove him were undemocratic, given he is the duly elected president and he'd won the Democratic Party's nomination. In the end, though, his decline was plain for all to see. Joe Biden's long political career has come to an end. Claire Herriot, TRT World.